I can't see.
Yeah, he's right there. Paul is right in front of
Oh
you.
no, Paulo Drummond.
I'm sorry?
Paulo Drummond. All right. Seeing no corrections to the information that I've put on the slide, there will be an event in here right after the keynote, and we're going to take questions. So if you have questions, we'll both ask people to show hands, and you can tweet. I'll have an iPad in front of me, and I can take questions from the internet. So either if you're in the audience and are wary of being eighth in line, or if you're watching from home, you can ask your questions through Twitter. That's our hashtag. Now, I've gotten Leonard's permission to start with a bit of an unusual biography item in order to introduce him. And in doing research to do an introduction, I came upon a recent Financial Times piece that points out there's more than just a research context here. In 1986, Leonard Wantchekon, then a student leader in Benin, West Africa, escaped from a jail after being tortured and held for 18 months for organizing university protests against a dictator. I escaped and made it across the border to Nigeria, then the Ivory Coast, and a year later to Canada, says Wantchekon. I was a political refugee without a home country. Now, as a full-time professor at Princeton, Wantchekon has recently embarked on a parallel mission in his native Benin to create a first-rate university from scratch, complete with a new campus. Named the African School of Economics, it has grown out of a research institute that Wantchekon founded in Benin in 2004. The ASC, which will partner with Princeton, will officially open in the autumn of 2014. They'll start with 3 undergraduate students and rent a location where they can build a new campus. But for people in this room, Leonard's probably far more known for his research, as on the cusp of both politics and economics. Someone who's known for work not only on clientelism, but on whether any policies we can take can help remedy it. For work on the political Dutch disease, resource wealth, and political regimes, or, from what I know best, economic history. So this is not my nefarious ploy to foist economic historians on you in keynote speeches, but anyone who's taken basically any class from me ever has had to read about the slave trade and the origins of mistrust in Africa. Indeed, several of the history students are going to have to replicate that this year. And the paper that we're going to see today is, again, a great example of how economic history can be used to inform our knowledge of African development in the present. I've seen it before. I don't know if any of you have, but this is really fabulous, and I'm looking forward to hearing you talk.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. Oh. All right, so let's see. Open the okay, good. All right, so thanks Jim for a very kind and generous introduction, and thanks Paul for inviting me. So needless to say, I'm extremely happy and excited to be here. My talk today is going to be on education and human capital externalities in colonial Africa. It based mostly on a joint paper with Marco Klashnia from NYU and Natalia Nodva from IMF. So as a way of introduction to the talk, so we all agree that the diffusion of knowledge and human capital are essential for growth and development. And to make sense of opportunities and challenges on contemporary development in Africa, we need to document spatial and intertemporal spillover of human capital and to uncover the mechanism of these spillovers. And human capital has a private side in as much as it increase income and improve living conditions, but it also a public return. It's a public good, and because it generates externalities, you know, and this is going to be more or less the focus of my presentation. So human capital contributes to the adoption of new and more productive technology and to innovation. It also has substantial labor market effect because of wage and output premium for the educated, and the fact that there are more job opportunities for the uneducated living near a school. So education also contributes to occupation diversity and social mobility. And last not least, education is associated with institutional quality, which contributes to growth. It also is associated with socialization and the development of civic competence. With that in mind, let's take a look at the state of education in Africa today. On the positive side, there have been a huge improvement in enrollment. So in fact, according to many analysts, especially Ritva Reinika from the World Bank, in fact, Africa has the second highest improvement in enrollment in history, only second to South Korea, and more than even the rich countries in 19th century. But this comes at a cost in terms of quality. If you look at most African countries, for instance, if you look at this chart, most African countries, around 30 to 40% of people of primary school age children reach grade 4 and achieve minimum learning standard in reading and math, so which is very poor. And this is due mostly to low effort teachers and low skill teachers. So a study done by the World Bank, a social on service delivery indicators, show that in terms of input, the situation is not catastrophic, at least in most countries, in terms of infrastructure and equipment, but it is in terms of providers' effort. For instance, there is a 57% classroom absence rate in Uganda, 53% in Tanzania. And in terms of classroom teaching time, in a country like Uganda, the official teaching time is 7 hours, 20 minutes, and only 2 hours, 58 minutes is used by the teacher. And then, in terms of providers' ability, you know, I'm sure my friends from Nigeria will not love to hear this, but the minimum knowledge, in terms of minimum knowledge required to teach in primary school, only 4%, I mean, you read this right, 4% of teachers in Nigeria have that ability, and at least according to, you know, the World Bank study, which is a very rigorous one. So Uganda is 20%, and you know, and Kenya 39%. So now, what is the way forward? So we can think about sensible solutions different ways. One way is, for instance, to use randomized control trial to test different policy alternatives, such as like teacher training, parental involvement, decentralized management. But we can also try to infer sensible solutions by rigorously analyzing data from education history. In particular, we can investigate, we have more data, more time frame to investigate more closely the mechanism through which human capital generated by colonial schools, for instance, spread spatially and across generations. So, what I like about colonial school in this context, because they are quasi-experiments. In many areas across Africa, schools were created during or at the end of colonial wars in areas with limited prior European settlements. So villagers at that time had very limited knowledge of the value of formal education, and there were limited opportunity for self-selection. So it's easier then to isolate the effect of education on a wide range of income, because schools were created under the veil of ignorance about the value of education, and also with no prior real interaction with Europeans. So in a paper that I completed with Colonial and Nogva, we use a unique social and demographic data set from the first regional school in Benin to uncover the effect of education on income, occupational choice, political participation. And we document various channels of transmission of human capital, such as individual aspirations, peer effect, and parental involvement, and parental investment. So the study came from a very personal motivation. So this guy over there is my uncle. So when I was growing up in the 50s, my mother would put a picture of that man on the wall and ask him to talk to him before I start my academic year, because you got to look like this guy, 40 years later, I still can't manage to wear a tie, but for the rest of it, I think I did quite well, trying to look like him. And the story of my mother was not unique, because there are many other families, for instance, who were grabbing to the opportunity of success by getting their kid to look up to a neighbor, to a family member. And as a result, the place where I grew up, called Doga Veggies in central Benin, a village of 350 people, I was growing up with about 40 kids. And among those 40, 11 of us has PhDs. And the primary and school enrollment rate in Veggie in the 60s were about 90%. So there is something powerful to education that goes beyond what it does to individual. It can drive my mother crazy. So we use, I use this as a launching pad for this project that started about 5 years ago and is still going on. So before I go to the methodology and the context, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the result. So we find that the treated, meaning those who have been educated, have better living standards, they are less likely to be farmers. In an environment where 94% of the population were subsistence farmers, that's a big deal. And there were also significant neighborhood externalities. The descendants of those in a village with school who have not been to school have better outcomes than those in a village without school. So not being uneducated, but in a village with school has a big effect. And we also find substantial extended family effects. Nephews and nieces are as educated as students' children, and far more than those without an educated family member. And we find that the externalities run through parents and hence social networks and aspiration. So the context of the study is Dahomey, a country colonized in 1894 after the army of the French, the army of the Kingdom of Dahomey and Amazon. I say Amazon, so, the army of the king was led by women, were defeated by the French colonial troops. And in that context, Catholic and public schools were created in various regions during the military expansion. And typically, institutions, colonial institutions are created about 8 to 10 years after the school was opened. So this gives us an opportunity, for instance, to really isolate the effect of education without the presence of European institutions. So here's a picture, for instance, of the colonial war, a picture of the Amazons taken after the war, and of the king of Dahomey surrendering to the French general. So the criteria, so the site that we selected for the study were rigorously selected. So we only considered schools that lie 100 kilometers from the coast, because above 100 kilometers, there were very, not at all, or very little European influence. And we selected 4 sites. So, and also there is a sense, if you read the historical materials, that, the schools were created more or less randomly. That there was no strong prior knowledge of the area. They have some knowledge of the general area where the school will be created for one reason or another. But then the exact site, the exact location between that region was not known in advance. So, for instance, the school in Zainando, where I was born, was created by those 2 priests, one from Indiana, another one from France. And then they have a clear sense of where they will start, which is a lake at the coast in Porto Novo. No clear sense of where we're going. So they managed to find a site, and that's where the school was created. So as a result, I can consider myself to some extent as the result of a historical accident. So now, having located where the school were set up, we need to sort of look for control sites, places that are comparable, places that would have been picked if we were slightly luckier. And the way we did this was, first of all, to exclude around the school, we draw 7-kilometer circle, a circle with 7-kilometer radius. And then every village within that area is called the treatment area, because kids 7 kilometers from the school can go to school. They have chance of meeting the priest, and then meeting the priest or the colonial administrator, and have the opportunity to go to school. But then from 7 to 20 kilometers, we consider those areas as the control area, because far less likely if you live in those villages to go to school. And then from the list of villages from 7 to 20 kilometers, we pick randomly 2 villages. So for instance, here is a map of Zainado. So as you can see, we have the first circle, with 7-kilometer radius, and then the larger one. So it's the band between the first circle and the second circle is where the control villages lie. So, and we again randomly pick 2 villages in that group that represent our control area. So now, we assuming that the site selection were near random. We also assuming that the student selection, the way the students were selected, were random. So to do this, we first took the list of the first 2 cohorts of students from the 4 schools that were selected, and we used archives from the school, colonial archives as well, to determine who were the first 2 kids ever to have been selected. And we know that those kids went to school without clear knowledge of how good school could be for their individual or collective well-being. We also use informants in the village, especially elders, to verify the information that we get from the archives. Now, it's trickier to actually to document those who did not go to school because there was no census at that time. You can have a list of those who've been to school, but those who were not, the general population, will have no idea who they were. So what we did then is do what we call backward sampling. So we went to a village, randomly select a number of people, and then ask them who their grandfathers are or were. So if the age of the grandfather is similar to the age of the people who went to school, then he qualifies to be in the control group. If not, he doesn't. So we sample the living as a way to sample the dead from 150 or 75 years ago. Now, in the paper, we explain in details how this was done and how this is a credible way to sample the population at that time. So, and then we went on to sort of use a social demographic survey to find out about education, income, and also the family characteristics of those individuals. Now, here is, for instance, a sample of archives that we are able to locate from the school. Here is the first cohort, the very first cohort of the school from Zanginado. So actually, the people that we checked, that we documented, were exactly in that picture. And so here's a picture of them being at school with the priest. And then, as I mentioned to you, we use Colonial archives. Here for an ID card of one of the kids that you saw, you didn't see him, one of the kids from the previous picture who grew up in 1956 was a businessman. And that's his picture. So we use that information to double check. So the data that we got from the informants. So this guy is the only living member of the cohort from one of the locations. The location is in northern Benin. The school was created in 1923. So he was part of the first two cohorts. We were able to interview him in details. So not only we have an archive, but we have one of the living members of the cohorts who gave us all the details about his classmates and so on. Unfortunately, he died about a couple of months after, so there's no correlation between the interview and the fact that he died. So no, we have nothing to do with what happened. So, and then I was very much part of the interview process. So you can see me there interviewing one of the informants who used to be the administrator during colonial times in Benin. And so it was a very detailed, long, painful process. So that led to the data. So now, so we wanted to see how education spread spatially. So we need to document not only people who've been to school, their family members, but also their neighbors. So that spatial spillover of human capital. Now, what about intertemporal? What about how the value of education, the benefit of education spread over time? So for that, we need to have a sample of descendants, people who, basically the children, the nephew and nieces of those who've been to school, and also the children, nephew and nieces of those who have not been to school, living near your school or not near your school. So having the descendant of the three groups that we are considering. So basically what we did, we had the enumerator listing all the children of the subject from treatment 1, treatment 2, and control, list all the siblings of treatment 1, treatment 2, and control, and then sample the children for each subject, if the number of children is less than 10, and then sample the sibling as well. And then when we have the sample of sibling, now we also go to list the children of those siblings and then sample the children of the sibling to get the nephew and the nieces. And then based on that, we also try, we did a social demographic survey. So you can see there were about 80 people involved in this work, and we started in 2009, and it's still going on. So it's I think it's an extremely important project for a wide range of reasons, and that's why. Okay, now, first, there is a sense using the pre-treatment variables to see that the treatment and control villages that we selected were similar, similar geographic, political, economic characteristics. And the individual that we have treatment and control villages were also similar as well. Now let's talk about the results. First result, effect on income. So only 14% of those been to school were farmers, while those who have not been to school, 84% of them were farmers. And you can see in terms of water, access to water, to electricity, the outcome is better. Importantly, they are more likely to be politically active, and also, they are more likely to have white friends, which at that time is it's a pathway to success. So now again, individual treatment strongly increased measure of living standard and wealth. So as you know, one picture is worth 1,000 words. That's a treated guy, So it's an actual family in our sample, and that's an untreated family, So the main difference, as you can see from the two pictures, is that there is one guy here who is wearing shoes, and no one was wearing shoes here. So I think the living standard of a treated from that picture alone tells the story. Now, in terms of housing, here is, it's not a typical housing, but it's a house of an individual from treatment 1, and here is the house of an individual from treatment 2, like someone living in a village with school, who have not been to school. So when you live near this house, you might as well get this one, So now, when you don't have this house around you, all right, you are stuck with this one, So as a result, you can see from housing quality how the presence of the educated affect the neighbor and affect the choices that they make. Now, the treated subjects have higher social status and wider social networks. They are more politically active. So, for instance, here is the data that you can use to, for instance, look at the causal effect of education on political participation. Because those who were selected to go to school were, to some degree, selected randomly, and if the effect here on political participation can be seen as causal. Now, let's look at the effect on, and this is really the punchline of the whole paper. So, you can see the gap between the children of the educated and the children of the uneducated had drastically shrunk. It was 90% in the first generation and 20% second generation. So people living near uneducated became crazy about education. And as a result, the story that I told you earlier led to this kind of outcome. And in terms of university education, for instance, there is not much difference between the children of the educated and the children of the uneducated. So, and doing the work more rigorously, you can see that being in a village with school gives you, much higher probability of being educated than being in a village without school. And the additional effect of coming from someone who is educated is sizable, but it's not that huge. And the gap decreases when when you move from primary to secondary education and to university. Now, same thing, the kids have more wealth, and there are strong village externality from school, and this, as I'll tell you later, this could be due not only to being close to someone and aspire to be up to someone who have been educated and aspire to be like him or her, and also maybe development outcome that comes with the school. The fact that because there is a school, then there are like the markets, the shops, and all this come, and as a result, everybody in the area, whether they have been to school or not, is better off. Now, so here is a picture of someone from the second generation. Now social ties, same thing. Now family externalities were also one of the punchline of the result of the paper. So listen to me. So children and nieces of the treated parents are significantly more educated than descendants of people with no education and people from control, but the children are by and large not more educated than nieces and nephews. So African families were a powerful instrument in spreading education. So when you have an educated member, an educated person in one family, the effects on nephew and nieces are extremely strong. So in a time where we talk about family tax and we talk about how backward African families can be, we need to really also think about the fact that they were powerful instrument for the spread of education in Africa. So, and okay, what are the mechanisms? The mechanism we can think of are several. So we in this paper we talk about aspirations, given the fact that those who live near someone educated try to emulate him, but also there are additional effects of the entrepreneurs who are educated. I'm going to talk about that in a second. So first of all, aspirations. So, and the way we capture aspiration is distance from the school, because distance from the school put you in touch, put you in contact with the educated, whether you are uneducated, even if you are uneducated. And then another crucial result is that we find a sibling of the educated, of uneducated who own a shop are 20% less likely to be farmers, and their descendants tend to be more educated. And 40% of descendants of educated shop owners have secondary school education, compared to 20% for those without shops. So the power, the strength of the externality is stronger when you actually use your salary, for instance, as collateral or whatever to open a business. And I think this is an important point to raise. It might be a way to show that, for instance, the redistributive feature of African families can be mitigated, for instance, if the educated is encouraged, for instance, to open a small business, to open a family business as well. It's a way of replacing workfare with welfare in the family. And it has a direct effect on how influential, how powerful education can be on the neighbors and children. So, and as I mentioned earlier, so typically things happen around school, like market, shops, colonial administration, road networks, health clinics, and that's local development. You have hubs of cluster of academic excellence. Sometimes goes with clusters of development as well. So this was true then, it should be true now. So how do you turn this into policy? So there are several ideas that come from the qualitative evidence and also from the quantitative evidence that we have collected. One is investment in institutional capacity. Schools then were basically like semi-military style institutions. If you are 2 minutes late going to school, you sweat, because the teacher is already there. You cannot come to the class after the teacher. That's it for you, So if now, as we say earlier, the teacher is late half an hour or an hour, then nothing left, We also need to raise standards and accountability. Those days, from the qualitative data that we have, inspectors were crucial for quality control and enforcement of rules and regulation. There are also local accountability mechanisms. I read reports from the local colonial administration about a teacher from one village who left his post for 2 hours for personal business. It was such a big deal that he wrote a report on it to send it to the general governor based in the capital city. So So local government were responsible, were responsible of enforcing the rule in schools. So the accountability mechanism, the standards were extremely high. So that's something we should learn from. And also, we need to improve teacher training and recruit the strongest graduate for teaching posts. At least in the French system, the teaching colleges were like research universities, which were as prestigious as engineering schools. The top anthropologist from Benin was in the 50s and 60s. His name is Paul Hazume. He was a primary school teacher. He was a primary school teacher, So the standard was extremely high those days. So that's part of the story. Now, raising aspiration is also part of the story. So we need to really engage families and local communities in promoting parental investment in children education. The fact that we have huge increase in enrollment could have been driven by the supply, meaning government being forced to create new schools, but also by the demand, because parents value education so much that new school has to be created. They were pushing everyone, in particular girls, to school. So same thing could happen with quality. With higher standard, higher aspirations, there must be a higher demand for quality. So the same way aspiration drove enrollment, aspiration could also drive quality today. So this is crucial. But now, how do you manufacture aspiration? So one way you do it is, for instance, to teach local history, particularly in primary school, to get kids to have local heroes that they can learn from, So the way, for instance, my uncle inspired me, maybe I can, if I want to go back to my village, to inspire some little kids who can grow up one day thinking that they can give a keynote speech at Oxford University when they grow up, So, those little things matter, and matter big, when we think about education. So we need to manufacture aspiration through the teaching of local social history. Summer schools are crucial. My center in Benin, for instance, have decided to send 17 kids from our master's program, high-end, top student in math, to local villages to teach mathematics. So they are there for 3 months. But the effect they're going to have will probably go beyond math, because it will be the first time some of those kids will see someone as talented. And I think that this will have an effect on them. This will also have an effect on their parents, And from the report that I have, those students that we sent to the villages, they're already considered like heroes. They're already considered like rock stars that the kids want to imitate. In fact, some of them are not even from Benin. Some of them are from Cameroon, from Cote d'Ivoire, from Togo, and that's extremely powerful. So we can manufacture these kind of programs to help kids to really think big and push for this. Peer effects are also extremely important. Create formal study group, for instance, in school and outside school hours to get the kids to sort of learn from each other. Diversify interaction among students through semi-structural cultural activities and physical activities. That's something that used to happen during the colonial times. When I was growing up, beside my parents, beside my uncle that I mentioned earlier, there were students from the village who were studying in France, in Grenoble, and they will come back to the village during summertime. And they will show you pictures of Paris and pictures of France, and makes you really want to be like them, And so peer effect is it's extremely important. Now, entrepreneurship when you think of entrepreneurship, you think directly about creating jobs, also reducing unemployment. But when you are educated and you are a small entrepreneur, it alleviates the family pressure that you have to redistribute your income. As I said earlier, you replace workfare with welfare in the family. And the effect, at least based on the data we have, is big. Those who earn income, not only through their regular job, but also by creating family businesses has stronger effect on not only on their family, but also on their neighbor. Now, to conclude the talk, so I thought that the study that I present show how we should think of school as institutions that need to be run not only in isolation from the local institutions, but also with local institutions. You know, the fact that local colonial administrator has a say, were able to enforce the rule in local schools were really part of the story. And when you think about the school, we need to think not only about what it did for individuals who've been to school, but we need to think about what it did for those around them. So the most powerful effect of education is not that it's the most powerful feature of education is not that it's a private good, it's actually a public good. And the public good effect of education comes from the way it shapes communities, the way it creates new norms in terms of attitude, and the fact that it inspires people, inspiring people who are around the school and around the educated, and that's something that we need to stress more. I used to be a leftist, and there are also some leftists around here, but they will tell me, well, the colonial school were training the colonized, which was an inferior race, and it was facilitating resource extraction, exploitation of Africa. I'm not denying that, but it's also true, and the data confirms, that schools, even in the colonial times, raise income, increase occupational diversity and local development in Africa. And the fact that it happened 80, 100 years ago gives us time to actually look closely at the mechanism through which this happened. And this is, in fact, an advantage over, for instance, a randomized control trial for which you have 2 or 3 years frame to try to understand what's happening. And also sometimes it's run by an NGO, so you don't know exactly how it's going to work if it was run by government. Those are real stuff done by the colonial administration, and we know how effective it was. It's painful to be able to collect the data, but it needs to be collected. So for us to be able to understand what's happened. And also, we should not really underestimate the fact that schools help institutional development in Africa by training the elite, political elite, that work against the colonial rule. All those independence leaders and Democrats and student leaders that we saw in the 60s and 70s were trained by colonial school. So it's important to value the education above and beyond the goal of the colonialism in setting up those schools to begin with. And it's crucial, as I mentioned earlier, that we learn from the past, because we want the past we want the present to outperform the past, and we want a brighter future for our children. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much. I wanted to start off with a shout out to the IGC in Mozambique. It's great to hear that you're watching. You can also ask a question if you'd like. So let's start off by taking some questions from the floor. We've got a few people with microphones. Let's do them in groups of 3. I see 1. I see 2.
Thank you for your presentation. I wonder whether there may be an alternative story compatible with your results, which is that the colonial authorities were really designing hubs first, where to kind of set up schools, and had, say, a direct aim of training the local elite that would have been useful for the colonial powers. And in that case, then you would expect that the hub develops not as a direct consequence of education, but rather better political links with the colonial powers and a direct attempt from the colonial authorities to develop that hub.
So I have two questions, they kind of lead to each other. I mean, your paper depends a lot on the idea that there's no prior knowledge about the effects of education. I'm not entirely sure if this is the case in Benin, but is there an influence from the Arabs in the north? I know in northern Nigeria, for example, prior to the colonial era, there's already a growing sense that being able to write in Arabic is important. So might that influence the outcomes? Which kind of brings me to the second part. I'm from the little country to the east of Benin, and the educational stats are bad in Nigeria as a whole, but in the north in particular, they're a lot worse. And part of the reason I think is because of this contest seeing literacy or education in English driving a sort of religious agenda. So to what extent do you think policymakers can get around that idea that Western education is a bad thing for them?
Is a
Bad thing.
okay.
And I saw a third one far at the back.
Okay, thank you very much for an interesting talk. So I just have a few, maybe 2 or 3 points or questions, comments and questions. So first of all, I sort of trying to think of going forward in terms of how do you apply the findings of this study to the present and the future. So I sort of, at least anecdotally, I think there's sort of a change in, more, if you want, culture in Africa, at least a couple of African countries. Education, I think the issue is that actually you tend to find a lot of less educated or uneducated people doing very well, in fact, very well compared to the educated. So that's something that's sort of intriguing to me in terms of trying to push the education agenda. And of course, in most countries also you find that actually, let's say, teachers are no longer revered. I think before, being a teacher was something that was probably more like upper middle class people, but nowadays, most teachers are actually probably barely making the poverty line. So the question then is, how do you make the case in terms of trying to link education in the present and going forward? Then lastly, the other thing that I also see in terms of your results, I think you found that there was sort of stronger participation in politics by the educated during that period. But actually, anecdotally again, it's not like solid evidence, but anecdotally, you seem to find that nowadays, most educated people actually, they sort of, maybe passively at best, participate in politics here in Africa because of the nature of the politics, which tend to be a bit violent. So people who have options, they try to avoid sort of engaging a lot more in politics. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I'll let you answer those before taking a second round.
Okay, so regarding colonial authority strategically designing places that they want to develop, so I think we provide enough evidence in the paper to counter that idea. In fact, Hillary, who worked on Francophone Africa, showed that there is some kind of reversal of fortune in areas that were more likely to benefit from education were the less likely to be educated from benefit from education because of the conflicts and the situations at that time. And if you read the historical materials from those days, you can see like very random. I mean, let me tell you a story. For instance, how the school was created in Zainado. So Monsignor Stemmer's work, he wanted to explore the country, went to inland. After 3 months, when he was returning, he decided to go left. And then we wanted to go left. he ran into people from the village who was extremely kind to him, very, very kind to him, because he was sick. And he was so touched by their kindness that he decided to create a school there. You know, and you have plenty of stories of that sort. You know, so you don't have any predisposition of a locality being selected to go to school. But I think, and also the way we design the study, we try to make sure that we compare the location with something which is very, very close, very similar to the place where the school was created. You know, by looking at the paper, you will see much more closely how the research design helped resolve that issue that you raised. Now, in terms of there is one location that's very close to the north, one of the locations of the story that's close to the north, that has, yes, a prior Arabic and Quranic school. So we were able to control explicitly for it, you know, in the study, and show that it was not an effect, you know. So it didn't really confound the result to the point where it's weakened our finding. In terms of, you know, and I think this is what we have to go against, like just developing an anti-education agenda because of the fact that we think that the colonial authorities were creating schools so that they can exploit our resources. You know, I mean, I watched 12 Years a Slave, a movie that came out. If you are a slave, you get educated, and you have to hide that you are educated. Otherwise, you get killed. You know, if the colonial authorities created a school simply as a goal to exploit Africa, then they miscalculated, you know, because it just happened that those who get educated are the one who organized, created the institution that goes against them. And the fact that education opened the world, open Africa to the world. I mean, like if you read the biography, for instance, of the first African educated, you know, one of the first Pan-African leaders from Benin, in 1918, he was really traveling around the world, you know, to Jamaica, to America, to gather other like-minded people to go against the colonial rule, you know. So education was a huge opportunity that was seized by the local elite, and miscalculation by the pre-colonial elite led them to ignore, you know, how valuable education was. And many of the chiefs who were against education earlier, they tried to catch up later on. No, I mean, I propose many solutions for the issues for teaching, but I mean, the main point here is we need to create elite school, so that we can train the top to be world-class, with the goal that when you have enough world-class teachers, world-class leaders, then we can overcome the issue of, we can overcome the fact that we have many more kids to be educated. You see what I mean? The challenge for us is not only to get more people educated, but to create a class, a group of teachers and intellectuals who are really world-class, so that they can help us solve, you know, the quality gap very fast. Now, you know, when I talk about politics, political participation, again, let's not trivialize the fact that, you know, that today, you know, people are more aware of what democracy is, people are more aware of their rights and all these kind of, those are advances. You know, it's not the fact that some leaders are corrupt, and that really should let us to underestimate, you know, how powerful education can be in transforming not only minds, you know, but also institutions. You know, that's, yeah.
All right, I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. So I see one right there, and I see one at the very far back.
Going back to the first question about selection of where the schools were located, let's say even if the initial establishment of the school was random, as some of the evidence that you mentioned suggests, it could still be that some of the schools failed. So initially they selected a village at random, but there was no interest, and some might have just been abandoned and then established elsewhere. and some prospered, and maybe for other reasons, maybe there was better organization or more interest. Do you have any idea about how many of the schools established succeeded?
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation, Leonard. Thank you very much. I'm going back to the early bird effect.
For
Early bird effect.
okay, early bird.
Exactly. That's what
Okay.
it is. In those days, I suspected there were huge increase in returns to education.
Yeah.
Those days, and therefore it's important. It is quite. It's to be expected that one will get these very huge results. Today, as we've expanded education, we also know that the problems of complementarity tend to hold sway. Complementarity type of problems, coordination problems, and so on. There are many people out there, so-called educated, who cannot find opportunities in the labor market, for example, which suggests that perhaps reallocation of resources towards the product sector to increase demand, derived demand for the educated might be important. So today, perhaps we may have constant or even decreasing returns to education, relative terms, compared to what it was previously. So the question is, how do we reorient our allocation priorities to ensure that we can still continue to reap the important effects of education that we've demonstrated? Thank you.
Yeah,
Good. So the school that were set up then, they were still around. We are still around. And we are not looking at long-term effect. We are looking at the effect immediately after the school was created. You know, so it's the result we have was on really the very first generation of people who actually attended those schools and how the school affected them directly. You know, so the school can, even if the school disappeared much later on, we can still capture the very early immediate effect and on the descendant. But besides that, all the schools, Kandis, Natitengu, Zanyanando, and Save, they are all around. You know, they are all around today. Now, again, local characteristics that might confound the result, we try to control for it by using fixed effect and also by designing the study in such a way that the control village is very, very close to the treatment villages. So anything that happened to the school will happen to the control. Anything that happens to the treatment will also happen to the control. Now, I think this is a fantastic point, the one made about early bird effect. So really, at that time, the demand for the demand for the educated was extremely huge, you know. So my uncle became an elementary school teacher in 4th grade. You know, he could be hired as an elementary school teacher after 4th grade. You know, so the demand was very, very high. And now, how do we sort of design the system today to its development? It's development. What changed? What the situation today is that the demand for the educated have shrunk, either because the state sector, the public sector took over, or because the proper environment had not been set up to sort of develop private sector jobs, and the schools, the curriculum has not been adapted, for instance, to link skills to job opportunities. So the same way the Colonial School was set up, take into consideration the needs, the demand. So the same thing has to be done today to get this kind of adequation between. And now, besides that, let's not forget that the effect of education go beyond its effect on income. It's how it makes people develop new norms, new values, and socialization, motivation, political participation, you know, and those things. And you cannot separate the fact that today the rise in democracy in Africa has to be linked to the fact that many, many more people here in Africa today don't have basic education. You know, they have basic sense of what their rights are, you know, and that's fundamental. That's fantastic. You know, so beyond the limits that the current system provide because development didn't catch up to the demand for education. We need to consider its value, its intrinsic value. But again, I think it's about being more creative, much more creative, to create job opportunities, economic opportunities for the educated, you know, and access to credits and all this kind of scheme to help those with means to create family business, small business, is something that should be really, 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 really encouraged, you know, and transform into practical policy solutions that, and again, this is the last word. If anything we want to remember from this study is really the value of aspiration, the value of aspiration. So, and this is critical. And because it's critical, this has to be manufactured so that the educated, regardless how well he does, he can influence people in his family or her family and those around him or her.
Thank you very much. So there should be coffee outside, and Paolo, if you're here, the floor is yours.